All right, so this is a low back exercise that you can use to help you decompress your low back. It also doubles as a hip exercise. So many people with things like hip impingement are gonna find this helpful as well. And it helps with your pelvic floor, with your diaphragm, if you've got any core related problems, any breath related problems, any problems actually decompressing your spine, utilizing your core. It's honestly just a really well-rounded exercise for many different things. Too many for me to actually list in this video. So if you have low back problems, if you have hip problems, if you've got pelvic problems, this is an exercise that many of you are going to find beneficial. Now, when we set up here, you'll see that Nick is set up at 90 degrees. This is actually quite important. So he's got his hips at 90 degrees, he's got his knees at 90 degrees, and then he's got his heels up on the wall. I'm going to talk you guys through this because the first thing that many of my clients will do wrong when doing this exercise is actually just set it up incorrectly. If Nick has his feet too low on the wall, that's going to set his weight up to be in the ball of his foot, which is actually going to be unhelpful for the exercise that we're going to be about to do. So we have to make sure that he has his heels in line with the wall. A genius idea that one of my clients actually had was to ask their partner, somebody that they lived with, when they were set up at 90 degrees, and then they put a little piece of painter's tape on the wall. And then every time they sat down and they did this exercise, they just lined their toes up with the painter's tape, and then they didn't have to worry about the angle of their knees and so on. Because like I said, it totally changes where your foot pressure is, which is actually going to change where you feel this exercise. You want to make sure that you nail that part of it. Once you've got your knees at 90 degrees, your hips at 90 degrees, and your toes lined up, the other thing you'll want to make sure is that your toes are not pointed off to the side, and rather they're pointed straight up towards the ceiling, and both toes are lined up at the same height on the wall. Many people naturally like to favor one leg, and as a consequence, when they set up with their feet on the wall, they'll feel like their feet are lined up, but they actually won't be. And when they look with their eyes, they'll notice that one foot is actually lower than the other, but their body interprets that as toes straight. So don't trust what your brain tells you, just check with your eyes and make sure that they are actually lined up. Once you've done that, you're going to take something like a yoga block. A foam roller also works very well. When you use your yoga block, for most people, I won't have them go this narrow, nor will I have them go this wide. We're going to put it between their legs like this, because for most people, that's going to put them about hip width apart. So we're going to put this between Nick's knees here. All Nick is going to do when he starts this activity is he's going to squeeze this block just a little bit, and this is important. You don't want to turn this exercise into a workout. So he's going to squeeze it enough that he feels his groin, and he just goes, okay, I feel my groin is now online, or it's joined the conversation here. And then he's going to move down to his heels, and while staying really heavy through his heels and really light through the ball of his foot, so his toes are just feathered on the wall, it's important that you don't lift them off, but they should be super light. While being heavy in your heels, you're going to think about trying to drag your feet down. So you actually want to be barefoot or wearing shoes when you do this activity, because if you're wearing socks and you do this properly, your feet are going to want to slide down on the wall. Because Nick is barefoot and he's got some grip, when he digs his heels down into the wall, he's going to feel his hamstrings engage. So now we have groin and we have hamstrings. And once we got both of those things online, or both of those things have joined the conversation, what Nick is going to do is while he pulls his heels down, he's going to shift his knees up no more than an inch or two. In doing so, what's going to happen is that Nick now had to roll his pelvis underneath him to make his knees come up. And in doing so, that changed the position of his pelvis, causing his pelvis to go into a little bit more of a posterior tilt or just leave spine extension, which actually brings his pelvic floor into a really good position and a really easy position for it to work. Same with his abdominal muscles. So he's going to need way less effort to get his core involved in what we're going to be doing here. Plus, in doing so, in shooting his knees up, if you bring them up just a little higher, Nick, there we go, that actually draws your lower lumbar vertebrae down, which helps to give you decompression of your lumbar spine from the bottom. Now, we're just going to stay here, so you never get a break. You're just going to try to maintain this the entire time throughout the rest of the exercise. Now, one, again, common mistake is that clients, when they do this, will shoot their knees up way too high, and then that causes their low back to actually leave the floor, and they basically turn it into a glute bridge. That's going to be counterproductive. So Nick, if you lower your knees back down, if you watch your kneecaps, okay, so if we look at Nick's kneecaps here, they should not come up more than an inch or two. So he's going to come up till he finds my hand, and you can watch your own knees with your eyes and just make sure you don't go too high. And you can ask yourself at any point during this activity, is my low back still on the ground? And the answer should be yes. The only thing that should leave the ground when you do that little scoop is your tailbone. Now that we've got all that organized, and like I said, it just stays still, We're gonna move up to the upper body and we're gonna organize the upper body here. So Nick is actually gonna have both of his arms straight up towards the ceiling like a zombie. Palms are gonna be facing in, and he's gonna be about shoulder width apart. So not out here and not hands together, but just straight up above the shoulders. And then what he's gonna do is he's gonna try and create space between his shoulder blades. So he's gonna lightly reach his shoulder blades away from each other, which is gonna cause his fingers to move away from his face, and he should then feel a stretch in his upper back between his shoulder blades. Another common mistake here is just working too hard. So when you separate your shoulder blades or you reach with your hands, you don't need to tense up every fiber in your body. So you don't want to see really tense fingers, really tense arms. You want to stay fairly relaxed. The muscles that help you reach are actually in the side of your rib cage and in your armpits. So you're just lightly reaching those arms apart. You might feel a little bit of work there, but you shouldn't feel like your whole arms are really tense. And if you do really good at this, in addition to feeling your shoulder blades separate, what you might also feel is your chest bone, so this bone in the front of your chest, dropping into the floor. As your shoulder blades create space, it gives your rib cage the opportunity to fall back into the ground, which is actually going to be the other part that helps to decompress your low back. Now, that's a very fussy setup. I'm basically teaching you every single mistake that I've noticed my clients make. The last one with this being, just like I said, reaching so hard that they over tense, and then they actually can't get air in their rib cage when they need it. And another sign that you're doing that is if you notice that your head starts to lift in this activity. So you don't want your head lifting, you don't want yourself doing a crunch and peeling your head off the ground. You're just creating space between your shoulder blades, because that's going to be one of the main places we want air to go. So, speaking of air, that's going to be the next thing that we're going to do. So now you're in position, finally. Now we're actually just going to breathe. So what Nick is going to do here is he's going to silently inhale through his nose, and you can follow along. Once he feels like he has a full breath, he's going to exhale through his mouth as long as he can, as he reaches his shoulder blades apart and lets his sternum drop down into the floor. Then he's going to pause for a second or two before he takes another breath in. When he takes that other breath in, he's going to slowly bring that air in again through his nose, trying not to let it rush in. And when he exhales fully and reaches his arms apart, towards the end of that exhale, what Nick is going to notice naturally happening is he's going to notice a contraction in his abdominals and the side of his torso. He's going to notice it, not lose it as he inhales, but also not add to it. So I don't want you to bear down and really tense your abs. Just notice that your abs naturally contract when you exhale fully and reach your shoulder blades apart. And when you notice that happen, pay attention to it, and then don't lose it on the next inhale. So Nick is now on his fourth breath. He's going to take another slow inhale, and he's going to try not to lose that tension in the side of his rib cage that he just naturally collected on the exhale. And then when he blows that air out, if he does a really good job, the base of his sternum, which would be right here, is going to get a little heavier into the ground. His knees are going to stay up. His hamstrings are still working. And women, you should feel like your bra strap area is getting a little heavier into the floor on each breath. And it's going to feel like it gets a little harder for you to inhale slowly on each breath. So Nick is doing a really good job. I'm going to make you do one extra breath. Silent, slow inhale through the nose, not losing that tension in the side of the abdomen, which is going to redirect a bunch of air into the rib cage. And then when he exhales, shoulder blades are going to come a little further apart, which means fingers will just lightly float towards the ceiling as the sternum drops down. And then you're just going to totally relax. So for most people, doing 5 breaths is more than enough. And they'll actually find that on each subsequent breath, it'll feel a little harder to inhale. Because what'll happen is that when Nick exhales, his ribs are actually going to naturally come together and drop down on exhalation. And that's going to limit air from going into his belly a little bit more on each subsequent breath, which is just going to mean he gets more and more air into his rib cage. But if you have a stiff rib cage, your rib cage may not be totally willing to accommodate that air right now because it is stiff. But as you keep pumping air there over time, it often starts to loosen up for you. So just know that you might feel a little bit like you're suffocating when you do this. If you exhale fully and your ribs fully depress and you start to experience kind of neutral or negative pressure, if that's foreign to you or something that is untrained for you, you might feel a little bit like you're suffocating. Then you're just gonna pause for just a brief second and only as long as you can while controlling the inhale. Take the slowest inhale that you can, remind yourself that you're not suffocating, and then fully repeat that process of slow inhale through the nose, full exhale through the mouth, little pause, 5 times in a row, and aim for 3 or 4 rounds of that. That exercise is technically called the 90-90 hip lift with a reach. So Nick was reaching with both arms. It was created by the Postural Restoration Institute, so I just want to credit them for this exercise as well. And like I said, it's been one of the most helpful exercises, or just very generally helpful exercises for many clients with low back pain that need decompression. They need to teach their low back how to take a chill pill, teach other muscles how to pick up the slack, like their core, their pelvic floor, their diaphragm, their hamstrings, their groin. And it's also really good for FAI because it helps to open up the front of the hip, takes some of the pressure off there, takes your hip flexors out of the equation, helps them relax. And like I said, also delegates some of that work to your hamstrings. So give that exercise a go. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments.